Okay, everybody, let's kick this off. I think we've got 80 of us in this room. So welcome everyone to the Career Advancement webinar series, and specifically for the pillar on workplace traits and growth mindset. So my name is Jasbir, and I do a lot of learning and development at the Center for Future Ready Graduates. I'm very happy today to be hosting Rahul, who will be sharing with us about how we can future-proof our careers. Now, before we get into all of that, I think most of you are pretty fairly familiar with the webinar system, but just in case you're not, let me just share that you have all been muted by us beforehand, just so that we have a very seamless audio experience. But if at any time you want to raise a question or you want to, if you've been invited to speak, so just simply unmute yourself, click the microphone button, and then you can share. The way we'll do this today is that Rahul has prepared the presentation in a few sections. And at the end of each section, there is space for questions. So at that point in time, you can speak up and ask a question. But before that, if you have a thought in your mind, if you have something that you want to ask about, put it in the chat. So there is a chat function. If you just play around with your features, you will find the chat function at the bottom of your screen. Click chat and ask your question there. I will be reviewing them. If I think it's relevant to what he's saying right now, I might just interrupt him and ask him to address it spot on. Otherwise, I will leave it till the end of that section where you have asked the question. Okay, so we look forward to all your questions, and we will try our very best to take as many as we can about how we can future-proof our careers better. Let me just now quickly say a couple more things. So look, this is a series where we're all about growing and being better at the workplace. And one big skill is interpersonal connections, speaking up, building relationships. And so to that end, I will encourage all of you, and I won't force you, I can't physically, but I will encourage all of you to just turn on your webcams. Let's try and make this as personable and as connected a session as we possibly can, since we can't be face-to-face together. If you can turn on your webcam so we can have better connection with one another, that'll be great. Now, if you're going to be asking questions as well, yeah, using a webcam will be really great, because then Rahul knows who you are, you can form a connection, and maybe after the session, you can add him on LinkedIn, and you have a really, really well-networked person in your corner. At the same time, no, I think that's it. So yeah, ask as many questions, have your webcam on, that'll be great. Now, without much further ado, let me introduce Rahul. So Rahul, I've had the privilege of knowing Rahul. He was a senior of mine in primary school. And then we reconnected when I discovered that he had a blog. This was when I was in uni. He had started working at McKinsey and was working in Papua New Guinea, right, Rahul? You were consulting the Papua government. And he had a blog, and the blog featured really exotic hornbills and great nature-esque places. And that got me very interested in. We were lucky to bump into him at a party, and then I asked him all these questions. This is like 10 years ago. And I followed his career since then, from McKinsey. He went on to do his Master's of Public Policy at the Kennedy School in Harvard, and then came back to the Singapore government to work in the Prime Minister's office, specifically in the Futures office, right, Rahul? And now he's head of people at GovTech. So we're very lucky to have him here with us. If you just join me in giving a very, very warm Zoom welcome to Rahul. Welcome, Rahul. The floor is yours. Thank you very much for being here.
Thanks, Jasbir. So before I get into the agenda, actually, I just wanted to get a sense from all of you. Thank you for joining. What you're really interested to find out. So in the chat, if you could just type out a quick phrase or a sentence of what you're hoping to get out of this session, and then it'll help me to shape some of my remarks to be able to cater to some of that. So just a quick phrase about what you're hoping to get from the session will be helpful as I go through the agenda. So today's agenda, just so you know, I'm dividing it into 4 parts. So I'm planning to start with a bit of my story in terms of life and career transitions. And here I'm going to spend a bit more time talking about how I made the transitions. I'll spend a little time talking about what I did, but a bit more time in terms of how you transition, so you can think for yourself how you want to make the moves in your own career going forward. The second session will be futures thinking, and that's from some of my work at the Center for Strategic Futures, using some of the tools to help you think about what's going to be relevant for the future and how you can then position yourself to take advantage of that. Third section, 3 timeless skills that I encourage you to focus on, and fourth section, 3 techniques to make the most of your first year at work so that you accelerate or zoom through your career quite quickly. So those are going to be the 4 sections, and then we'll have time at the end for open Q&A. As Jasveer mentioned earlier, at the end of each section, I'll be pausing for questions specifically about those individual sections. So that's the flow and roughly the timings of what today's session is going to be like. I don't see a lot of responses.
So yeah, folks, just jump in and put on the chat what is it that you want to learn or take away from today, so that Rahul can better orientate his sharing.
Yeah, maybe I'll wait for a minute for everybody to pen down some responses. Transition. Interesting. Okay, so we have transition from university to work. How can I look forward and plan my career? Differences between public sector and private sector. Okay, cool. So I'll talk about some of these in my first section. So feel free to have the responses keep coming in, and I'll look at them as we go. So I'll start off with my own life, and in particular my career. So Jasveer and I were both at ACS growing up, and then unlike most of my friends, I actually went to Temasek JC where I was good at math, so I was encouraged to do math and science. So I took maths, physics, and chemistry for my A levels, and then I was told, these are good things to go into and be an engineer. I didn't really know what an engineer entailed, and so I just took that advice and went to Michigan, which is one of the top schools in the US for engineering of all disciplines, and so that's why I went there. And to answer one of the questions, what I wish I had known is that there are so many disciplines that if you have certain skills, there are really so many pathways open to you, both at university and in work, and you don't have to be limited by popular or known career choices. But fortunately, that's something I discovered in university. So once I did an internship in engine testing in Germany during the 2006 World Cup in Berlin, I realized actually I don't have a passion for fixing cars or making them better, but really I did enjoy the discipline of analytical problem solving. And so I wondered, what is a career, or at least a first job, that could give me that analytical problem solving ability, but not applied necessarily to cars or engineering. And so I started my career at McKinsey and Company as a business analyst. And so that's really about thinking about difficult problems that a lot of people are struggling with and finding answers in short amounts of time. So this is anything ranging from increasing revenue at an oil company, or even public sector challenges like education and climate change. And so that's why I actually discovered my passion for public service, because my second year at McKinsey, I did public sector work for the governments of Indonesia and Malaysia on climate change and education, which are still the two issues that I think are most interesting to me. And then got a secondment after that, because so I realized I really like public sector work, but then I began to think about what role do I want to play. As my first job out of college was just an advisor to people. I had never really done anything. I had never driven any projects. So I was thinking about, I need to figure out whether driving projects is something I want to do. Do I want to be responsible for the results that come out of my work, or just advise people? And it felt a bit empty to me to just be an advisor without having done the work myself. So I got a secondment to join the government of Papua New Guinea and start up the Climate Change and Development Authority. At that time, it was called the Office of Climate Change and Development. And so when I went there, it was just a piece of paper. It was a cabinet decision that said, hey, we want to set this office up. And my job was, hey, Rahul, it normally takes 2 or 3 years to make this happen. Can you do it in 6 months? Because we don't know how long the political stability is going to last. So can you make this happen in a short amount of time? We don't know exactly what needs to happen, but can you draw up a plan of making this happen in 6 months and then make it happen? And so that was my job, and I thought it was a really interesting job. And in terms of transitions, right, when I was at McKinsey, I was looking for this direct ground experience. So I set this up not as a consultant role, but as an actual government employee role to make it happen. And so for that, I had to commit for at least 6 months. And McKinsey projects are normally about a 3 month duration, 3 or 4 months is typical project duration. So I had to commit for a longer time frame in order to create that role. And so that's something that I was willing to do because I knew I wanted some direct ground experience in the public sector. I wanted some interface with international multilateral organizations like the UN and the World Bank. And so I managed to get that in this role at the Climate Change Development Authority. So after that, I realized, okay, I really like public sector work. It can be really painful. A lot of bureaucracy can be involved, but it's really, really impactful. And I focused my energy and my time on what is going to be really impactful. And I defined it quite simply as maximum impact for maximum people over the maximum period of time. The simple formula, right? And so climate change, a deep issue, going to affect people for a really long time. And so any action that's taken with regards to reducing deforestation, renewable energy sources, is really going to impact a long-term future. Papua New Guinea is a country, similar size population to Singapore, so 5+ million, but country spread out over the size of a country like France. So really, really big and really low population density. So really potential to affect a lot of countries potentially as examples as part of the small island developing states community. And so big potential for impact both in the country and as an example. So I thought that was a good thing. And then I was like, well, I want to work in the public sector a bit more because it's meaningful and because it has large potential for impact, but I have no academic credentials. I studied mechanical engineering when I was at Michigan. So let me build up my credentials by applying to Harvard Kennedy School of Government. And I was fairly bold in my young age. And so I decided I'm just going to go to the best school. I'm just not going to go to grad school. And so I applied to Harvard, and I didn't apply to any other school. I had no backup plan. And lo and behold, 4 months later, when I applied, so my plan was 6 months in between McKinsey and then go to Harvard. Lo and behold, few months later in March, I wake up one morning and there's an email from Harvard saying, straight up, you're rejected, forget about it. And I had no backup plan. So then I was like, damn, I got to think about something else. And so after the end of my 6 month tenure, I was thinking about whether I should do something else. I was flown to Sydney to interview with Google as a finance analyst, and I interviewed at Dell and a few other places. But then I thought to myself, well, I'm going to be in a role that I don't enjoy so much, either as a financial analyst or somebody at the bottom. My impact isn't going to be as impactful as if I stayed potentially. And my boss and my team and my colleagues were really keen for me to stay. And it turns out that being rejected from Harvard was one of the best things that happened to me because it allowed me to stay, which is what I decided, in Papua New Guinea for another full year. So I spent 1.5 years there. And in that year, what I spent my time on is building capabilities, which upon reflection now backwards, I realized that's actually the thing that I really like doing. I really like helping people find their potential and build that potential, navigate a path through the system, figure out what it takes to build their career. And so I enjoyed doing that. I enjoyed putting together training programs, but also figuring out how to get them building those skills at the workplace. So that was Papua New Guinea. Really enjoyed that. And then I applied a year later to Harvard and some other schools. And then this time I got in to Harvard. And so then I spent my time at Harvard. At Harvard, I actually quickly learned, what something I wish I knew before going, in fact, to do that is actually, you don't really need a master's to learn about a professional discipline. Actually, I think within 2 months or so, I realized that I thought I was going primarily for academic value. But in 2 months, I realized a lot of policy making is actually common sense. How do you apply an analytical rigor and framework towards some of the current policies? I'm not saying it's easy, but it actually didn't require me doing a master's. And so I said, well, I'm here for 2 years anyway. Making the most of this maybe is not in an academic sense, but more in understanding from my peers what their journeys have been. And I was very lucky to be able to ask a lot of questions to people who had a variety of experiences, because my goal going into Harvard was actually to transition into one of these multilateral organizations. So my goal was to actually work at the UN, the World Bank. And I spoke to people who were at the Harvard Kennedy School who had worked at these places, and all of them, without exception, told me, we're all trying to get out, actually. And I think it's a bad idea for you, Rahul, to go into the UN or the World Bank at this stage in your career, because you'll largely be pushing papers around. You won't have a lot of decision-making power. You won't be able to drive stuff. If you're really, really interested in this, you should spend another 6, 7, 8 years outside. And then if you're still keen, then you come in at a level that is a project manager where you can decide who's on your team, what projects you're going to work on, and it'll be more meaningful at that time. So that really helped shift my own focus and my own career towards then working in the public sector in a different role. So I spent my summer in Ethiopia at the Agricultural Transformation Agency, and it led to me writing my thesis for their government on how do you build capabilities. And so that's something that I enjoy. They pushed me really hard to make it really, really practical. So a lot of implementation detail. So that was quite nice. I thought for me to be able to make something practical. And then I decided, okay, I want to move home. It'll be nice to, I've done all of this because I grew up in Singapore and had so much opportunity. Let me contribute back to the country that allowed me all of this. And so I had a very brief stint at The Economist Intelligence Unit, writing a paper around higher education in South Asia. And it just reinforced for me the distance from impact is not something that I want. It's too academic. It's a bit like consulting, and I didn't want that. At the same time, I wanted a position in the Singapore government that would give me an overview of what's happening, what are the current thinking in across all of government. And so I ended up getting a position at the Center for Strategic Futures, because that's a broad overview of what are the future issues that many different agencies are thinking about. And it was nice. It was nice 2 years there thinking about these issues. But again, I realized my passion is really on getting things done, putting things into action. And so I moved to the Ministry of Home Affairs after a brief stint at Skills Future, thinking about what the skills of the future. I spent some time at the Ministry of Home Affairs, blending that future. So I built up the futures team and the capabilities, but I also was in charge of resource management. So I could now decide the allocation of manpower, the growth of the police or civil defense or immigration, based on what were the future trends and how to improve technology and development going forward. So that was nice to have that blend. And finally, I was like, hey, I really need a startup organization. I want to be even more involved in developing people at a place where it's really, really well recognized and it's an existential crisis. And in tech, it's an existential crisis because people have so many options. They can go anywhere. And so we've actually lost people before I joined because we didn't have appropriate development opportunities for people to develop. And that's multiple ways, right? It's both compensation, but it's also, do you have a pathway to develop forward? And because that wasn't designed well, we saw a lot of our senior engineers moving away to the private sector. And so because it's an existential crisis, then the question is, how can we reimagine government in a way to allow for these people development to happen, and that we're able to retain talent, but also attract people maybe who would have otherwise stayed in the private sector or had a different career trajectory to join us and stay with us and grow. And so that's a question that I think about now every day. And that's a question that I spend my time figuring out. And it has multi-facets, right? It has the benchmarking and salaries. It has learning and development. It has performance management and how that's done. Can we move away from, to give you a specific example, can we move away from a bell curve or relative ranking, because that doesn't really encourage collaboration. And collaboration is critical to any teamwork, getting things done, but especially if you're working in small teams on projects, you want people to collaborate. So can we move away from a relative bell curve distribution into an absolute scale? That requires some hard work around designing what the absolute scales look like and getting more data around people's where they are relative to the scale. So how did we design a system? It included a lot of peer feedback. I made it evaluative. We designed together with both employee feedback, but also industry feedback on what it takes to be performing at different levels. And we carved out different levels that were suitable. And so that's a model that we've been trying since I joined, since the last 7 or 8 months. Seems to be working relatively well so far. Going through my second cycle of performance management, receiving pretty good feedback so far. But just to give you an idea of some of the issues that I've been thinking about now and how I transition through my career. What's the next stage for me? I think I want to do a bit of teaching. So I'm now with the Center of Asia Leadership as a faculty. I teach 4 times a year. I've been teaching regionally. I mean, I don't know where I can travel next, but last year I taught in the Philippines, I taught in Bangladesh, I taught in Kuching in Malaysia, and I taught a bunch of people from the UAE who came to Singapore. I'm hoping to talk about adaptive leadership, which is not necessarily reimagining, but in fact turning upside down some of the principles of leadership, because it's an issue really that allows people to achieve their full potential much more. That's a theme for me. So I want to do a little bit of that, and I want to do some coaching. So I've taken some coaching courses, in the evenings and on weekends, and I'm in the process of getting my certification from the International Coach Federation. So that's kind of the next stage for me in my career and how I'm thinking about my transition in the longer term future. So I'll pause there, and I guess it's time for questions. I'm happy to answer the questions that come up on this subject.
Hey Rahul, there's a whole bunch of questions. I've been monitoring the chat. Maybe I will, just for the sake of efficiency,
Yeah,
I will pick a couple of them which are relevant to what you've spoken about.
sure.
So there's a couple of questions around the transitioning. So one, transition to doing postgraduate studies. What do you consider before you choose to go or not to go for postgraduate studies? And this adjacent question to that is, okay, people always say that I need to have 2 years of work experience before doing a master's. Is that correct? Or can I go now as a fresh grad? What are some
Yeah,
of the
sure.
considerations?
Sure. So first question, what do we look for in terms of doing a postgrad, right? So I think the first thing, you should look for 3 things, I would say, and at least that's how I thought about it. So the first is the academic or the industry actual knowledge, right? So for me, I went to learn more about government, because that's why I went to the School of Government to learn more about School of Government. So it's an industry that you want to learn more about. The second thing is the peer feedback, or at least understanding peers. So you get exposed to people who are in this space, who have done what you probably want to do in the future, and you get the opportunity to really ask them about what their experience has been like. Is it what you imagine or not? So in my case, I shared about how actually it was kind of opposite. And so because I had the opportunity to ask these people these questions, it helped me shift the direction of my career. And the third is really the specific, I guess you can call it related to the courses that you're going to do. So are there specific courses that are really going to be helpful for you? And along with that, I'll say, are there specific professors or faculty that you think are really, really interesting? So I, for example, had my thesis advisor, this guy called Callistus Juma, who's really an expert in agriculture and in Africa. And so he was really helpful for me when I was thinking about my career in international development work, to meet and to spend time with, as were some of my professors in philosophy and ethics that I was thinking about. So these are the 3 dimensions. I mean, a fourth one you may want to consider is really why you want to do this. And frankly, one of the reasons why I chose Harvard is because it's a brand that really would open up doors. And that is my experience. That is what I found when I applied to the Singapore government. It wasn't an easy transition. Actually, it took me almost a year to land a job after I graduated from Harvard, because people couldn't see necessarily the relevance in my work experience as a consultant to government, and it was a very unconventional profile, which made a lot of people a bit skeptical. So what helped open some of the doors is the fact that I went to Harvard, and that was a stamp on my credibility. That was nice to have. So that's kind of a fourth factor. But those are the 3 factors. Second question, should I spend 2 years before I do a master's? Actually, my own opinion is you should spend more. I think you should spend like 3 or 4 years at least. I spent 4 years working before I think I could have done with another year or 2, honestly, of work experience. And the reason for this is I think you will both learn more and contribute more if you're able to have at least 2 sets of different experiences. So when I was in my classes, to give you an example, right, of comparative politics or economics, I could go back in my mind to either a time when I was in McKinsey working on some projects and think about how this might be relevant in that frame of mind and in that role. But I could also go to my time in Papua New Guinea as a government employee in a developing country to think about how could I have changed something differently. How could I have done something differently in this situation with the knowledge that I now have from being in grad school? It also allowed me to draw from 2 very different hats when I was contributing in class. And class participation in grad school is much more significant. In fact, it often counts for 50, 60% of the time of class. So your professor only speaks for 30-40% of the time. And so what you can bring to the table really is going to jump if you are able to experience at least 2 experiences in a solid way. So that's what I would encourage you to do before going to grad school.
Mm.
Yeah.
Okay. There were a few questions about the crucial skills for the public sector.
Hmm.
Would you like to take that now, or do you think you'll cover it later on in the rest of your presentation?
There it goes now. I think specifically to the public sector, you have to understand a lot about how the organization works and how bureaucracy works, frankly. I mean, I don't mean this with a negative connotation, but the fact is there are layers of approval and you'll have to clear them. So you will have to find out, number one, how the organization works. So do the people who are in your leadership prefer well-drafted emails? Do they prefer PowerPoint presentations? Do they prefer you to present personally? There are different leadership styles, and so you need to understand what works best for your leadership, and you need to understand, as starting out all the way up, who prefers what. And that means you probably have to make multiple versions. You know, your direct boss might prefer a PowerPoint presentation, and your division boss, and then your perm sec might prefer a well-drafted submission or Word document that lays everything out clearly. So you'll have to figure out what is the best way to navigate and push a recommendation through so that it's a smooth way. So that's the first thing you need to understand, how the organization work, what the personalities are and what their preferences are. I think the second big thing you will have to understand is you really should be an expert. You should know the most about the subject. If there's any question that comes up, actually you should be best placed to answer that question, which means you need to have done the research yourself rather than that kind of outsourcing it. And even if it's you're taking benchmarks or studies, you need to understand why you made certain decisions about what is a more relevant benchmark to use, for example, than something else that could have possibly been used. I mean, if you're at the Ministry of Home Affairs and you're thinking about safety and security, what benchmarks? There are so many surveys out there, right? Universities, the rankings of universities, there are different surveys out there. On what basis are you going to choose one ranking over another? What is the methodology? You're going to have to understand a lot of that so that when people look to you for explanations, you're able to provide that. So you really should be an expert. You don't have to do that before the fact. When you're in the role, you just need to immerse yourself in that particular domain when you're putting up a recommendation. Really understand and think through why you're suggesting something and what are the bases behind that. I mean, that's true for any analytical related job. You should do this, but in the public sector, it is going to come back to you because there's so many layers of people who could ask questions. You're going to be responsible to answer those questions. And hopefully you have thought long and hard about how you prepared a position. I think the third is just understanding who you're working with and what motivates them. In the public sector, certainly there's a lot of motivation about doing the best thing for people, right? For citizens, for residents of Singapore. And so sometimes when people share different views, remember to align to that goal. Like what is really going to be the best solution for the people that your proposal addresses. And sometimes, by the nature of when you come in fresh into a system, you don't necessarily have access to all the meetings and all the papers that senior people might have access. So they might have a bunch of different considerations. You might think about the technical considerations or the best things, like how you design, for example, a CPM system, right? Technically, what is the best thing that we could do? But there may be other considerations. You may want to consider different age groups, different needs, different ways in which this could be implemented easier. Sometimes if I think the best solution is for this needs first person to get, 83.33% versus somebody else gets 67%, and somebody else gets like 35% based on a complicated set of matrices, it may be the best technical solution, but from an understanding point of view and from a communication point of view, it may not be so good. So how do you balance these two? These trade-offs are things that people might be able to decide, because if something is clear and meaningful, that might count more than having the most exact technical solutions for each target party. So these are considerations that it's okay if you don't know, but just keep in mind that at the end of the day, the goal should be served of everybody benefiting the most from a particular decision, a policy, a recommendation. And so keep that in mind and don't take things so personally. Yeah, those are my 3 tips for public sector work.
Okay, great. Do you have time for another question in this section?
Okay, one more, last one.
Right. I think this one's relevant here. So you talked about your transitions a lot. So there are two parts to this. How did you transition from engineering to consulting in McKinsey, or being a financial analyst in McKinsey? I don't know whether you mentioned you were a financial analyst. And then how did you transition then to the government sector? So from the private sector to the public sector. So how did you do these transitions? Was it through connections? Was it?
Yeah, different ways. So the first transition. So I was just to clarify, I was a business analyst at McKinsey. I was interviewing for a financial analyst position at Google in Sydney, which I opted not to take later on. But how did I transition? Actually, the consulting frame of mind, what you really need to be a consultant is analytical thinking. Like think about how to break a problem down well, and then how you can spend a little bit of time at 80-20, right? Which I'll talk about a bit later. But how do you solve a problem in a way that is analytical and yet rigorous? And actually, engineering prepares you quite well for that. It's just a different domain. So instead of applying to engineering problems, I applied it to business problems. That's it. So in fact, engineering was good training for my McKinsey interviews. And then I just got a call. Basically, I submitted to the McKinsey website, got a call, say, hey, we're flying to interview, flying to New York for interviews. Kind of interviews. I had a bunch of interviews and a problem solving test. And then that was it. And then I was hired. So that was how that transition happened. For the government one, it was a bit harder. So I guess two things. One, first, I wanted to blend my professional experience in government, both at McKinsey and Papua New Guinea, with my academic experience, right? So that was the first stage of my transition, building up my academic street cred by getting my master's in public policy. This didn't prove to be as effective as I thought it would be. And in the end, how I ended up landing my first job was through networking. So I had about 100 coffees, I would say, between graduating and getting my offer. And one of the coffees I had, the problem with coffees is, or at least the issue with coffees is, you never know which one's going to lead you somewhere. So I had to have all 100 of them. I couldn't have cut them out because you just don't know where they're going to lead. And so one of the people I had a coffee with was a guy called David Skilling, who I had worked with at McKinsey, who was brought in. He's from New Zealand, and he was brought in to help build up Asia's public sector practice. And so I had worked with him because I sat in his office one day as McKinsey and I said, hey, I like public sector work. Please staff me on a project. I know you're in. And he's like, well, I don't have anything for now, but I'll think of you. And so I ended up working with him on a piece, internal piece of McKinsey to think about the future of the public service practice. Anyway, so I had a coffee with him and he's like, I don't know a lot of what's going on, but I helped edit a book for Donald Low. I don't know if you guys know Donald Low, but he's a fairly prominent person who shares a lot of opinions on Facebook now about current governance. And he used to be he used to be the director of the Strategic Policy Office, which is also known as the Center for Strategic Futures before. And so he said, let me introduce you to Donald Low, and you should speak to Donald Low, and he has a good sense and a good pulse of what's going on. At the time, Donald Low was Executive Vice Dean at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy. And Donald Low was kind enough to meet me for 45 minutes and have a coffee with me. And he's like, hey, I would love to offer you a job, but frankly, the government needs more people like you who are a bit different and different profiles. And unless a recommendation comes from somebody who's trustworthy, it's hard for them to take a chance on somebody who they don't know with a weird profile. And so he was kind enough to write me a really, really great recommendation to the current director of the Center for Strategic Futures. And that recommendation essentially got me an interview. And so by getting the interview, that's how I landed my thing. And I can't overstate the importance of networking enough in getting you transitions. All right, cool. So you can keep the questions that are interesting, I guess, for the last section, if there's still some. So thank you for the questions. I'll move to the second session on futures. And I just want to launch the poll, actually. Just I don't know if you can launch it. I'm having.
Yeah, I'll do it. All right.
So I just want to launch a poll to get a feel, right, as an introduction. This is going to be, I'm just giving you a bit of heads up. This is going to be a bit more interactive session. There's a poll and there's going to be a breakout room later on in this section for you to participate. And yeah, so the question is just to get a feel for what's going on in terms of how you feel about the future, where you guys are at. So we'll wait till like at least 60 or 70% of people have voted before we share the results.
All right. People still voting. Okay, I'm going to end the poll and share the results.
All right. So, I must say I'm not entirely surprised. So glad to see that not a lot of y'all are afraid. I think that's nice to see. Anxious is certainly a sentiment that's not surprising, especially given the current situation. I wonder how different this would be without COVID, actually. A nice 36% of you are hopeful. I think that's nice. So some people are clearly both anxious and hopeful. So that's nice. It's multi-select. And a few people are confident. I think that's good. And so it's good to see. If you're anxious, I'm going to provide some tools that will help you. I hope give some confidence, bring you from anxiety to a bit of confidence, and give you an advantage over other people. So how I'm going to do this section is going to be it might be a bit of an overload, but I'd rather give you more information rather than less. So I'm going to give you some broad overviews of futures thinking and condense it down to driving forces to an exercise that you'll do. And then after that, we'll have time for questions. So broad overview, what is futures thinking? So you may recognize some of these images. There's Harry Potter, and there's Marvel, the Avengers, both the Endgame and Infinity War. So futures thinking because of the reference to Doctor Strange, but really futures thinking isn't this idea of prediction. I think futures thinking is often thought about as prediction, but really the idea is to consider possible alternatives which you don't necessarily consider in your day-to-day work or in typical strategic planning, and to emphasize to people why it's important to consider them. I mean, I think COVID is a really great clear example of why you should consider other situations then life is going to be normal and we're just going to proceed at a snail's pace. I mean, there are many other examples, right, ranging from Brexit, Trump's election, the discontinuities in the stock market, the meeting between North and South Korea, or Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump even, and all of these things. There are lots of shocks and discontinuities that might happen. So it's important to think about the future in a broader way. And really, it's not about predictions, but rather finding the balance between possibility and probability. And I'll talk about this a bit more here, right? And so you can think about the future in the 4 Ps, right? So there's possible, and there are so many different possible futures. It's a bit overwhelming to think about all of that. Then you can think about what's plausible. So what is plausible? It might happen, not that it could happen, but or it can happen, but it might happen if certain things happen. And then you think about the preferred scenarios, hopefully are somewhere between your plausible and implausible scenarios. And then you want to think about the plausible. Now the probable scenarios are really things that typically organizations already think about. Your typical strategic planning functions think about this. Your 3 to 5 year extrapolation of trends think about this. So you don't really want to spend a lot more time thinking about this because this is already covered in typically in projections and trends in forecasting. So you're not really going to get a lot of value. So a lot of the value in futures is from this gray zone. And how you test if something is in a gray zone is it should meet 2 criteria, right? 2 opposite criteria. The first is if somebody says to you, hey, this is ridiculous, this is never gonna happen, it's not plausible. So then that doesn't meet the criteria, right? So you want somebody to say, okay, this might happen. It meets the plausibility criteria. And then the second criteria you want it to meet is, hey, I didn't think about this before. So you don't want it to be in the probable range. You want it to be outside of the probable range. So that's how you test. If you go to somebody and they're like, hey, this is an interesting idea, I never thought about it before, or I didn't think about it in much depth, and 2, this could happen. If it meets both these criteria, then you hit the nail on the head. Like, this is the kind of range of futures that you want to be exploring further. So that's just for you to get a sense. So when you test your ideas with people, if you get both of these reactions, then you're in good shape. So that's broad overview. Now, what kind of futures am I talking about? I'm going to talk about the scenario planning, which is really a discipline that started actually 50 years ago with Shell. Shell really thought about the drop of oil prices as early as 50 years ago, and then allowed them then to think about investing in renewable energy and developing other parts of their business like consulting much earlier than other oil companies. And that's really what's kept them ahead of the game, is futures thinking, and specifically by doing scenario planning. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about scenario planning, but it's useful to think about these four archetypes of scenarios. And really, to give you a simple example of the four that you can see on the screen, if you think about after COVID, what might happen, right? It's possible that we go back to really unlikely, but we go to a typical growth scenario. That would have been actually if there was no COVID and we had the 10 years after the global financial crisis in 2008. That was just a pure growth scenario, just growing. I don't think that's going to happen anymore. Then there's a constraint, which is, well, if COVID happens now, it's just a stop. We just can't grow the economy much more anymore because we're stuck. And we need to break through this. Maybe we need a vaccine. And until we have a vaccine, we're just stuck in this constrained environment until such point. And so that's where we are now. Or it could be a collapse, like people just lose faith in capitalism and the fact that essential workers in many countries are not paid maybe as much as they should be to uplift other people. And so maybe they all go on strike. And then what happens? The whole economy collapses because the people who we need most aren't well equipped to take care of us and they go on strike. So there's a collapse there. Or you might see a transformation. So this might look like, a lot of banks, for example, are saying, well, do we really need all our staff to come to the office every day? Actually, maybe not. So we redefine the ways of working in such a way that allows for perhaps more inclusivity. So maybe you have people who in the past, working mother, for example, people who are caretakers and to look after aging parents, who in the past couldn't commit to a 9-to-5 job working in the office, who now have access. And so you have a new flood of talent that enters the market. And so it reshapes what the economy and what the industry looks like. So I'm just giving examples of taking one or two factors, and you can design a scenario around it. And so this will give you ideas. And so ultimately what you come up with is a way to define what are the skills and what are the pieces that are going to be relevant for the future, regardless of the scenario. So can you think of some skill and where you're going to invest in that, regardless of whether it's a growth, a constraint, a collapse, or transformation scenario, it is going to be relevant for you to invest. So that's how, in a way, you future-proof your career. Because if you stress test the direction that you're going into different scenarios, and in all scenarios it holds, then you're in a pretty good shape. So that's really the whole idea. And then the third one, like I said, this will be the last one for this section, is to go even narrower, right? So you have the whole like possible, plausible, how you define futures. Second is scenarios. What are the four archetypes of scenarios and how do you define? And the third and final one for this section is driving forces. So the driving forces are if they play out differently, they are going to lead to the scenarios being different. It's going to lead to growth or collapse or constraint or transformation, depending on how these driving forces play out. So I'll give you one example, and if you really want to, I'll give you a second. So the example is this example, and so there's four parts to this example. So the first is, and you should pay attention to this, especially because you're going to create your own driving forces right after this, when we break it out into groups. So the first part is going to be a summary, and so that is the bottom left of the screen. So in this one, it's new work arrangements may replace many traditional employee-employer relationships, right? So that's a quick summary of what is this idea. Second, where are we now? So what's really going on now? What are we seeing? So the descriptions in this case are, instead of working full-time, maybe you can call this freelancing or gig economy, right? People are splitting their time in terms of figuring out how to work. Just like how I work a little bit for Center for Asia Leadership, and I spend a bit of my time coaching too. So what are the different ways in which people are making work arrangements? What are the deals people are making? And also the different ways to monetize resources, right? So what are the work arrangements? Are we going to see, for example, people monetizing their spare rooms to become co-working spaces? For people who want to use them, maybe not as much as a WeWork where you have to have a monthly subscription, but on a on-demand basis. Are we going to see something like that? So that's a new work arrangement. What do we know? That's the third section. So what do we know now? Like, what are we seeing? What are some of the trends that we're seeing that might influence this factor to move one way or the other, right? So you're seeing more choices that are happening in the market. You have this in the Airbnb and the travel space, but you might also see this in the workspace. You have Justco, you have WeWork, you have a whole bunch of different, you have working capital, you have a whole bunch of different options. So you're seeing this, you're seeing different people choose. You're seeing, even if you're looking at government, offices like mine, Open Government Products, we're housed in a WeWork. I work in a WeWork. MCCY's Readiness Engagement Division is also housed in a WeWork right next to mine. So this is something that is different that we're seeing now already, that signals to how this might unfold. And the fourth section is some ideas of where this might go. What don't we know? So we don't know how pervasive this is going to be. So you don't know the size of the market. You don't know what's going to happen with underemployment, employment, and what does this mean for CPF, for retirement contributions to people? Are people going to be prepared for retirement if they don't contribute to CPF in the way that they've been doing in the future, in the past? So if you can figure out some of these questions, then that will lead you then to some kind of skills for you to be able to then enter the market, right? So I hope you can see this. Like, you can think about different models, for example, in this case, of how to provide some of these services on demand to people who might need them in a different way than they've been providing in the past. If you think this is going to go in the future, you can provide new ways of savings or retirement. You might be able to come up with some kind of insurance model or retirement fund model that maybe just didn't have appeal in the past because CPF was present so much. So you can begin to see how the way these factors might change might open up new avenues, new businesses, new product ideas for you to consider. And so that's one idea. I think it doesn't just have to be the economy, but given that this is about careers in the future, you can think about this in different ways. So just these were actually cards that were part of when I was at the Center for Strategic Futures 5 years ago. We developed these. We developed 20 of these driving forces that we felt might affect what the scenarios of the future might look like. So you can actually download all these cards from the Center for Strategic website at csf.sg. You can go find them under publications. And just to show you a quick example, I don't want to confuse you, but just to show you another example that is straight up economy related, is future of synchronous society. So how will the limited space we use, and you're seeing a little bit of that with how we're housing migrant workers now, right? Like in terms of they're housed at the expo, some of them are in camps, their new facilities that are brought up. So where are we, and how is this going to change in the future? And how might that affect some of the technologies that might be used maybe for communication? Even how do you communicate with people spread across different locations? How do you use resources in different ways? And so if you think about some of these ideas, they might generate new career ideas for you, new skills ideas, new product ideas, quite similarly in the way that the first driving force generated. All right, so we're going to go straight into the exercise. So Jaspir's got the breakup groups lined up. And so just before we launch into that, just 4 things for your group to come up with. Take 5 minutes. We'll give you a minute extra to think about it. In your group, the person with the earliest alphabet, so from A onwards, is going to be presenting and recording notes. So you don't have to discuss that. So that we're going to ask for a couple of people to share their ideas at the end of the session. 4 things for you to discuss. 1, what's the broad idea? 2nd, where are we now? 3rd, what do we know? So what are the signals that we're seeing? And 2, where might we go? What are some things we might have to think about in the future? That's it. It doesn't have to be long. 1 or 2 bullet points for each section is totally fine. So we're going to try this out. We're going to break you up into groups of 4 or 5, and then we'll come back.
How much time do they have?
Let's give them 6 minutes.
Okay, 6 minutes. Okay, guys. So I'm going to send you to breakout rooms right now. It's going to just be automatically divided. You might have some staff in there. You might have fellow students. Once everyone is in, like Rahul said, person with the first alphabet chronologically or alphabetically, you are going to take the notes. And then when Rahul calls on you afterwards, you will present. Okay, so let's go. All right. Okay, the rooms are opening. Hi everyone. If you can hear this message, it means you're in my room, which is the main room. You've not joined any breakout room, and that's fine. If you want me to put you in a breakout room, just click the yes button on the chat so I can make sure you get a room, okay? I'm not sure whether you intentionally didn't join or you just joined us late and so you didn't get the chance to join a room. So if you want to join a room to discuss the breakout discussion on what's a possible future scenario that's affecting the skills we all need to have, click yes. Otherwise, I've assumed that you just chose not to be in the room because of other reasons, okay? People are coming back in right now. The breakout rooms are closing.
Cool.
So incidentally, I should have preempted this, but when we said breakout rooms, we instantly lost, I think, 10 or 15% of participants who just chose to exit. Maybe they'll join back in. I guess they didn't know that they could have just not joined the room. They could have clicked not join and they could have just done it on their own. Next time we can make that clear.
Yeah.
But it's okay. I see them coming back in now. Okay, looks like everyone is back in the main session. Thank you all for participating in the breakout rooms. I appreciate that you were patient enough to wait for each other to join and figure out how the mechanics work. But I trust that once you got that started, you had a fruitful discussion. All right, Rahul, back to you.
Yeah, so I just want to hear 2 examples maybe. So I would prefer not to cold call you. So if there are any volunteers to share your ideas, please jump in.
Unmute yourself and just jump in with your ideas.
Hi, my name is Violet. I can share what my group talked about. Is it okay if I don't use video?
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay. So we talked about accessibility to digital technologies. I think our group was thinking about this in the with regards to the current situation with COVID, and we were talking about specifically lower income households. So at the moment, due to the situation, we realized that there's a gap in accessibility. Like one is with regards to the actual physical technology, like a lot of these lower income households might have access to internet, but they use it through their like smartphones instead of like a computer. And for home-based learning, a lot of the times we rely or we need a computer to access, you know, to have all these like lessons and all that. So a lot of the charities have stepped up to donate or to source for laptops so that these the children in these low income households or students, they are able to attend their lessons and all that. What do we know? Yeah, there's a gap. Where might we go? So one idea we had was possibly looking at opportunities to set up a social enterprise kind of situation where you allow low income households to rent laptops or other necessary digital technology, and perhaps like you sort of make it sustainable by creating opportunities for people to work in this like setup where like they also help to maintain the laptop. So you give them a job opportunity through the need for digital technology. So that sort of thing.
Cool, thank you. That's a good one. Yeah, interesting opportunities there. One more person.
I suppose I could share. I will share what my group mates Rachel and Minwei and I thought of. So the first thing we're looking at actually is the transformation of the healthcare industry and actually how consultations during this whole COVID period are being made. So where are we now? I think we're looking at actually how e-consultations, both for either be it physical symptoms, but also looking at mental health. So, and how that is kind of being managed. So what we know is the fact currently that how labor is being distributed and how manpower is being used during this whole period has kind of transformed altogether, which actually brings up many possibilities in terms of moving forward. How do you actually want to educate and train the population to be more medically savvy in that sense? So be it, for example, if you're looking at national service, and if you're looking at conscription for women as well, do we want there to be some sort of medical training, or do we want to extend this sort of education to everyone, or kind of include it in the education curriculum, for example? And I think things we're talking about, what we don't exactly know is the fact that can technology actually keep up, in a sense that is our existing tech infrastructure? If we are looking at e-consultations, for example, can that kind of support all this kind of like medical needs in that sense, and also looking towards innovation? So some of my group mates were suggesting that actually some countries have medical kits that are delivered to individual households, and individual households are doing their own testing, which then they kind of mail to the labs, for example, to actually find out the results. Another thing of concern we had was actually about digital literacy, especially for aging population, and how they are going to actually manage with e-consultations, for example, especially given that they are the ones who are more susceptible to, for example, to COVID, right? And yet these are the people, the very people who need these e-consultations, but they are the ones who don't necessarily have access to it. And also looking at changing people's minds and preferences, like they might not exactly be comfortable with e-consultations, or especially when it comes to physical symptoms, sometimes it's kind of like, how can you really tell, how can a doctor really assess you sometimes? Yeah, I think these are some of the things that we covered. Yep.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, that's true. There are technological questions there. There are accessibility questions there. And it's about mindsets, right? How do you get people to change mindsets? So these are all going to be relevant in thinking. I mean, my own view is you're seeing some of telehealth stuff happen already, like you described. So it's just going to be a gradual thing. It's not going to be a overnight thing. And I don't think it's going to be a replacement, certainly not anytime soon. But you'll see how the complementary efforts and where it starts to substitute more and more. And then we'll see how it unfolds. So yeah, thank you. Thanks, Johnny and Violet, for your presentations. Cool. So I want to open up the floor more broadly for questions. Any questions about this section in particular?
Rahul, just let you know that your slides are not
Yeah.
shared right now. Just
Yeah,
like
I'll get them back on, yeah. Any
folks,
questions?
feel free to dive in with any questions out loud or in the chat.
Hi, could I ask a question? This is Violet. Hello?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Go ahead, Violet.
Sorry, I was unsure if I was audible. Going to the looking at futures thinking, right, with the model that you showed just now, could you explain the idea of the preferable circle? Like I'm not sure if I didn't catch it just now, but what do you mean by like preferable in terms of like the overlap between, yeah, because it's in two sections, right? The gray zone and the one outside, the white zone.
Yeah. The preferable can
you.
be in different scenarios, but really the idea is, because sometimes the things that we prefer are not really likely to happen, right? Like I would prefer to win the lottery tomorrow, but it's probably not in the plausible range. So some preferred scenarios can be, it's just an example of where a preferred scenario could be. Often it's at the intersection, but it doesn't have to be. The other useful way to think about preferred scenario, or at least preferred elements of scenario, when you design scenarios, it's useful to think about scenarios as having elements that you prefer. And so then people are like, oh, what do I need to do to get towards that scenario that I prefer? And it's also useful to design other scenarios that you don't prefer, that you don't like, because then you can think about what are the things that I need to do to avoid going to this scenario and go away from that scenario. To give you a specific example, in the last round of scenarios, there was a scenario around, we wanted to stress test the idea or the assumption that we really need, as Singapore, we really need to grow our GDP, and that's the cornerstone of Singaporeans being happy, right? Like, we want to test this idea. And so you design a scenario where there's preferable and unpreferable elements in it. So there's a scenario where GDP growth is awesome, it's really, really great, but it actually largely goes to a few corporations and a few wealthy people. So it's very unevenly distributed. Now, the elements that are preferred is the GDP scenario, but actually the distribution is not preferred. So how like that? I mean, how do we, in a way, get the positive benefits of this scenario, but avoid the negative benefits? So that's an example. And we had another scenario where the GDP growth was actually really, really bad. We missed the boat, for example. What happened is people got together, you had the kind of kampong spirit, revitalization come back, and there's a lot of the shared economy stuff, which isn't captured in GDP, but people's quality of life really was enhanced by that. So, there are different elements in the scenario. Some are preferred, some are not preferred. And so you want to do that to help people think about in different ways, how do I get to certain elements and how do I not? So you just want to think about what are preferred elements and what are not, so you can design your scenarios to be more complex and more nuanced. That's the purpose of putting that there.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome. Cool. I'm going to move on to the next session because we're a bit behind. And then if there are other questions, you can just have them answered in the open Q&A session. So 3 timeless skills I want to talk about. Problem solving. So I began to talk about this, and what do I mean by problem solving? Dealing with people, what kinds of people you have to deal with and how. And third is a learning growth mindset, which I probably won't spend much time on because I heard it covered in some of the groups earlier. So I'm just going to give 3 tips for problem solving and what it entails, right? So if you Google like McKinsey's 7-step problem solving, it's quite a nice definition. But really the idea is, can you identify what the problem is? This is harder than it sounds. And it's the old adage of the elephant there, like what is really the problem? If you think the problem, for example, is, the problem is I want to increase my revenue as in my organization by 20%. Well, what's the problem? Is the problem really about market share? Are you losing market share? And so you have to analyze why that's happening. Is it about your pricing? Is your pricing off compared to other competitors? Is it that the market is changing and accessibility might be changing for your product? So identifying the problem is non-trivial. It's pretty difficult. And then you've got to break it down into ways so that you can test different elements of the problem in a quick way, and not that it takes an entire year or something to figure it out. So that's really what problem solving is about. If you understand this well, then you'll be able to actually break down tough questions that might come from a large organization point of view, and break it down to say about how you're helping address a particular issue and how that relates to the goal of the organization. So that's really a key skill to practice, and think about when you're doing a piece of work, think about what problem are you really solving and what part of that problem are you solving. That'd be helpful for you when you also communicate this, when you communicate your solution, your approach, your work further up, because then it has a lot of meaning for the organization when you're able to say, this is the problem that I'm addressing and this is the part of the problem that I'm working on. Second is 80-20 approach. And so that is really spending 20% of your time and getting 80% of the results. And I'm to give you a specific example, how is that done? So for example, I said I was revising the performance management model and moving away from a bell curve model or relative model. How can I test this in an 80-20 way rather than design a really complicated software to deliver peer feedback and to anonymize and aggregate this? What I did was I just did it on Google Sheets, right? So because I want to test whether this approach works, so I don't need a high-tech solution to do this. I just want to test out how it feels like and get feedback from people using Google Forms or something, just to get feedback on people on whether it is working. Then I can think about refining this into a product that makes sense if it's something I want to pursue. But maybe I just want to spend a bit of time. So I create a Google Sheet template. I send it out to my colleagues. I'm like, send it back to me. I'll anonymize and aggregate it. I wrote a Google script in JavaScript. I got one of my colleagues to help me out with that. And then, so I only spent 20% of time doing it. And then rather than investing time in employing a vendor or building it with one of the engineers, and then I'll just get a feel for, does it make sense or not? So similarly, what are the ways in which you can get back of the envelope calculations to think about, does this make sense for the organization to pursue? If you're going to invest in something that's going to take up more resources than it costs, or at least be around the same magnitude, it probably doesn't make sense. So if you have reasonable calculations that show that something doesn't make sense to pursue, that's usually enough to stop a decision. Or if you can show that the benefits are just going to be so much larger than the possible cost, actually makes sense to pursue this further. And you don't need complicated algorithms or mechanisms typically to get a feel for what's the ballpark of where this is going to go. And the third is multiple perspectives, and it's useful to think about, you talked about accessibility earlier, at least Pilot did, right? And Journey did in their things. Accessibility is a key part. Who is going to have access to things? Is it going to matter when you solve a problem, whether you're the user or the administrator? What are their views going to be of a particular solution? I'm talking about tech solution here, but really for any problem, you want to make sure different target groups are addressed. When you solve a problem, you want it not to be suitable for the person who is doing the work or compiling, but you want it to be suitable for the user. if you look at the iPhone, right, a classic example, like Steve Jobs was seeing it not from the perspective of the developer or the person who's generating the the phone itself or manufacturing it, but really from the perspective of the user. And he was able to see something that other people didn't focus on enough or weren't able to see. It's just how much their lives were improved by using a visual graphical interface and by using app store and icons in a way that just previous phones could not do. So those are my three big tips around problem solving. Here's a quick diagram around what that might look like for you. Identify the problem, define what it is, explore the problem in greater detail, figure out what action steps are, and then look back and figure out if there are more parts of the problem that you might want to address. So that's the first skill. Second, dealing with people, and I'll talk about three things here. Self-management, I think you guys have understood this through your university time because you have to have some time management, right? How do you prioritize your tasks? How do you figure out your time? Do you manage by time blocks? Do you manage by energy? Like I use a Pomodoro timer, honestly, and a Kanban flow board. So I have a board that has the tasks of the day that I need to do, and I just drag them around from like completed to in progress to being done. And I use a timer. There's a simple Pomodoro timer, which is 20 minutes, work on this thing, and then take a 5-minute break, and then do a 20 minutes, work on a task, and do a 5-minute break. That works for me. You have to figure out how to manage yourself so that you get a bunch of work done. How do you account for prioritization at the beginning of the week, accountability at the end of the week? What system you use, that's up to you, but it should be a system that you can hopefully easily communicate to your boss and make it transparent so that people understand and maybe even to your team. Sideways management, this will come in working with teams. So you have some exposure to this in university. In the workforce, I guess, like there are severe consequences to things not getting done in time typically. So you want to be able to work with your peers if there's problems to have a mechanism or to have a way, at least a comfort level that that's identified early. At least you can say, hey, actually this is not working. I can't figure out how to do this part. Either somebody needs to teach me something or somebody needs to take over my part of work. And maybe I can switch with you and trade with you and I can take on this part of work. So how do you manage working with your team? Because if you do this effectively, actually your boss will have to get less involved. And that's great because it frees up their capacity to then do something that maybe is involved in tying stuff together. And the third thing I would say that maybe you haven't considered that is really crucial in the workplace is upwards management. And this is basically managing your boss. And so if you do this really well, actually you can set out. So I tend to set out, I'm like, hey, boss, every Monday, I'm like, hey, I've thought about what's most important for the organization to move forward. And this is what I think is most important for the organization. And this is how I think we can get there. This is what I want to try out this week. So for example, working from home, right? I was like, hey, I thought about, what people are missing is this sense of camaraderie. Can we set up both formal mechanisms and informal mechanisms? So for formal mechanisms, let's set up a team check-in. Could be 5 or 10 minutes at like 6 p.m. And then you brief people. So people are aware of what's going on. It replaces the kind of office cooler or eavesdropping stuff. Let's do a 6 p.m. check-in. Make it optional because people have parents, people have things to do. So it doesn't have to be compulsory, but let people come and check in and see what's up. And that can also serve as a nice end to the workday. Let's have like team lunches. We used to eat lunch as a team. Let's have optional team lunches on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Let's see who turns up. If people like this, like let's continue this. If people don't like it, we can bunk it. So if I think about this at the beginning, my boss can just say like, great, sounds good, go for it. And then that's great because then I get to control what work I do, what I work on. And he's quite happy also because then at the end of the week, I can just put in a quick summary to him and say, hey, boss, by the way, this is what I developed. These are some of the findings that I've had, and these are my proposals for next week. So that's really helpful because it allows you to control some autonomy. You might not be able to do this right off the bat, starting with your job, but you will as time progresses and you understand more about the problems that you want to solve and how you might want to solve them. So this is really, really great. It shows that you're autonomous and it shows that you're ready for the next level of work if you're able to upward manage well. And then the third thing, I won't spend a lot of time on this, but really the idea, Carol Dweck's idea of the growth mindset. And so the idea that like you're always learning, you're always upskilling yourself, reskilling yourself, because you always need to find out, and that's happened for me too. Like I needed to learn JavaScript because I work in a tech organization, so I need to have a feel for what it's like to code and to get a feel for how engineers feel. And so I've learned. I mean, I'm not an expert by any means, but I've been able to program a Slack bot to be able to ask people for input in private direct messages on what you worked on for the week. and then they can collate it. They can collate it and pump it out to the entire team, so everybody knows what everybody else has worked on in a way that it's easy to see. So I coded that, and that's part of my additional learning, and it helps me then understand some of the challenges that other people deal with. And you have to do that over the course of your career. Just remember that this is not the end of your learning, and it's going to continue going forward. So those are my 3 big tips for timeless skills that you need. And so this is relevant because as you know, you saw my own story. I'm still learning. I went back to school. I'm still learning to code right now. And so you split your time between education, work, and leisure, and it's not just a sequential arrangement. So these are my 3 big tips. And if you have any questions about any of these 3 specific skills that I mentioned, now is the time to ask them.
Before someone else jumps in, and I invite everyone to jump in, there was a question at the start of the class which I didn't bring up, but this is a good time to bring it up. I can't remember which student asked, I think it was Samuel. He asked, what are your thoughts in computing and coding skills for fresh grads? So many fresh grads come from different disciplines outside of computing and coding. They don't have those skills. So should they go and learn it right now, or should they maybe play to their strengths and go hard on the value add they bring that maybe the computing students don't bring?
So I think there are 2 things that are valuable about coding, and coding is in a way a representation of these 2 things, right? So the first is analytical thinking. Because to code, you really need to put down your thoughts in structured way. What happens first? What things are done in parallel? What happens next? And you have to debug, right? You have to figure out what are the problems with the code and debug. But really, it's a manifestation of, can you translate what you're thinking in your head into something really concrete that can run as a program? So it's more important for you to be able to do this really effectively in different mediums. Coding is one medium, but you want to be able to do this when you communicate your ideas in your presentations too. Like why does it make sense? Like, can you describe the problem? Can you describe why this particular approach to the problem makes sense? And can you describe what the approach is in enough detail, not too much detail, but enough detail where people understand where you're going and what you did? And can you figure out what the appropriate KPIs and metrics are to measure? Right? I mean, that's another way of breaking down a problem analytically and communicating it. Coding, you have to do this all in code. So find a way to have this analytical thinking translated to paper. I think coding is one good way to do it, but there are other ways that you'll have to work on this skill. And the second thing about coding that's really cool is it's your relationship with technology. And that's something that is going to be relevant in the future. You have to understand, especially more than coding, I would say, data analytics and how you're going to code, because you want to measure results of anything you do in some way, shape, or form. So how are you going to do that? You might code, you might not have to code, but you have to understand what are the metrics and how you're going to be able to measure them. I think data analytics is possibly even more important than coding. At least basic data analytics in Excel is absolute minimum, because then you can measure your own performance and the effectiveness of your own initiatives that you recommend. And that is just proof not only for your success, but for the organization's success going forward. And it gives you the ability to make data-driven decision-making, which I think is going to be really, really crucial in the future. So those are the advantages. You can do this through coding. And I think you should, because your relationship to technology, you should understand how tech works. You don't have to go into coding, but if you have some time, I do recommend it. I took a course called the Web Developers Bootcamp on Udemy. So if you want to take that one, I thought it was cool, but it's a bit long. It's like 40 or 50 hours. So I'm halfway through that course. I haven't even finished it. So that's cool. Yeah, so that's what I recommend for that question.
To ask the question, apart from coding, are there other ways to improve our analytical and critical thinking?
Yeah, I mean, yes. So I would say, think about a problem that you're solving, whatever piece of work you're doing, think about what problem you're solving. Think about what are the different possible ways you could approach that problem. And probably the work you're doing is one possible way, but not the only way. So think about all the possible ways you could solve this problem, and think about the pros and cons of those different approaches. So that will require you to think about, I mean, what are pros and cons, right? I mean, the obvious ones are cost in terms of time and money, but there may be other things that you are trying to achieve. If you're trying to achieve accessibility, what are the approaches of counting people by different target groups. If you count people by age, for example, age demographics, right, elderly, and you have groups by every 10 years, and you say, hey, these people are not usually accessible because they're older, so they don't know. Are you missing out different categories of people that may also not have accessibility to digital technology? So are you missing out different characteristics of people? So income is another obvious one. But are there other ones? Are there people maybe with enough income and who are young, but still don't have access to digital technology? And why might that be? So if you have different approaches, then that can help you think about a problem analytically and holistically at the same time. You might even be able to propose a different approach than the one that you're currently working on that might be more effective. But you can only do this if you really understand the root problem that you're solving, what part of the problem you're solving, and then what is the approach that you're solving, and you understand the trade-offs of tackling these and how the other parts of the problems are going to be solved, so that they can integrate together to provide a larger solution. So that's a good way, I would say. Any piece of work that you're assigned, think about what's the larger problem, how is it broken down, what are the trails, different approaches, and how does your particular approach or piece of work fit in to this broader picture. Cool. Great. So final section, and then we'll merge the questions for this section with overall questions. So you'll have a free for all for questions. And so 3 techniques to zoom, pun intended, into your first year at work. And so what I found really interesting about the people who work alongside me, the people who have grown the most, are really the people who ask for feedback most often. They make it, they ask, and I'll go through who, what, when, where, how, right? Who should you ask for feedback from? You should ask for feedback from people who have seen your work. And don't limit it to your boss, right? So if you're in a presentation or a large meeting, and there are a few other people, ask your colleagues, what could I have done? What did I do well here? What could I have done better in this presentation? So ask people around you for feedback. I have a colleague who literally every time he presents something, he's like, please, I would love feedback. Please direct message me for any feedback that you have. You can set up a channel to make it anonymous feedback. If that makes you more comfortable, you can set that up for yourself. And if that makes other people more comfortable, and you can do stuff to get feedback, because that's really the fastest way to improve. When really actually as much as possible is really helpful, so that you're not surprised when it comes to your 6 months or your annual performance reviews, because you've been getting feedback regularly. And how do it in a way that's convenient, that's easiest for you. I think face-to-face is best. Of course, it's hard, but you really should get feedback by video. And really one important thing about feedback is to ask for specific examples. That's why it's important, rather than like, oh, I have this general sense about person X. No, give them specific examples. So that's why it's best to ask for feedback right after a particular event. And what's even better is we can tell somebody before. So if I'm going into a presentation, I will ask somebody around me, hey, I want you to give me feedback about this presentation. So make sure you pay attention and give me feedback, good feedback that's actionable at the end of my presentation. So if you preempt somebody, they are paying more attention. They are actively looking out for things that you're doing well or not. So if you give people that leeway, actually they're happy to. In general, people are quite happy to provide feedback so that you can grow and you can learn. But it is important for you to proactively ask, because it's quite easy for people to get caught up into their own work and their own day-to-day routine. So you actively asking out feedback from people is really helpful for people to then take the time out and the effort out to go and give you feedback. So that's the first technique, and that's really where a lot of the growth goes. Second, how do you improve? I want to, a lot of people are going for a lot of webinars these days, and webinars are not bad. It's just that you have to realize, and even courses, right? Coding courses, right? You can take a course, but ultimately, if you don't exercise the skill itself, you're going to lose the skill. It's not going to be that useful for you. Training is just one part of a longer skill building journey. You need to actually put that into place. Ideally, you're asking for learning, coaching, mentoring from people around you who are proficient in this skill, so that they can guide you through how to be even better at this skill. And this is everything, right? I'm not just talking about technology or presentations, very important. Communication, written communication, oral communication, analytics. How can you design something that you can make you work faster? Are there things that you're missing out that can improve your skill set really, really a lot? So the improvement training is one component, but really supplement that actively with asking for help and coaching and mentoring from people who are better than you at that skill. So what that also means is you can actually ask different people for help for different skills. So it doesn't burden somebody too much. You say, hey, I know this guy's an Excel expert. Let me ask him for help for Excel. I know this person's really good at presentations. Let me ask them for help for presentations. I know my boss has like really good feedback for me on how I can code better. So if you do this, actually the load on other people to help you improve is not much. And at the same time, you can improve 3 or 4 or 5 times faster than somebody who's only seeking help from one person on one skill. So that's a way to, and constantly think about what you want to improve on and focus on specifically those who just have a few, let's have 2 or 3 per quarter, per 6 months, and really focus on building those up in a good way before you re-examine what skills you want to improve on. And the third and final one is self-reflection. I mean, for you to think about the things I described earlier, right, from futures thinking to not just what's external and what's happening in the world, but also internally, what drives you, what problem do you want to solve, what do you want to work on, what value are you going to add. You want to think about these things and reflect on those often. I would say at least at minimum every 6 months. That's the minimum. I would think every 3 months is roughly good to think about, what's going on outside, what's going on internally. Think about that. If you find it helpful, I find it helpful to have self-reflection, not by myself, but with other people. So I have a specific person that I call to do self-reflection. And I have 2 or 3 people that I call. So I actually do this. So when I improve on certain things and thinking about my career as entrepreneurship, the founder of Circles Life, Abhishek Gupta, is a really good friend of mine. We're at McKinsey together. And so he's a really good partner for me to do some self-reflection. He asked me very incisive questions to help me think more about why I'm doing what I'm doing and does it really make sense for me at this point in time. So find a thought partner. It can be other students, who want to go on this journey together and really accelerate your improvement in the journey. So I'll give you four key questions to ask. So the first key question to ask is, where are you? And what's important in this question is ask, where am I now? What's going on for me? And you want to take 3 types of inputs for this question, right? You want to take, what am I thinking, right? What are my thoughts? Am I excited by this? Does this particular piece of work seem interesting to me? This direction seem interesting, right? So what are your thoughts? Intellectually, what are you thinking about in terms of your pathway and where you are now? Secondly, what are you feeling? What emotions are you going on? Are you excited to come to work? Do you feel happy? Do you feel motivated by your teammates and then coming to work? Or do you feel just dejected and demotivated? What are the feelings that you go through over a period of a day or a week or a month? So think about your feelings. And third, think about what you're doing. And that's in terms of your physical body. Are you motivated to sit down in front of the screen? Are you motivated to walk to work? Are you motivated to talk to your colleagues about improvement, about skills, about your work or not? So what is your body telling you about where you are right now? Is it excited? Is it giving you signs that you need to walk away? Or do you need to walk up? Do you need to take a step up and do something else? So ask yourself, when you ask yourself, where are we? And if you ask your friends, if you're doing pair work, ask them these questions. Make sure it's not just about what our thoughts are. You can get stuck in one of these 3 dimensions, depends on which ones we're predisposed to. Make sure you capture all 3 of these. Second question, where do you want to go? So where do you want to go from here? What's next for you? And it can be in this job, it can be in a career transition. What's next for you? What are the skills you want to build? Why is this relevant? Who do you want to be? At the end of this journey or these 6 months, what kind of person do you want to be? How would you draw yourself? How would you, if you played yourself in a movie, what would that look like in the future? So use different modes. Again, use the physical, emotional, and intellectual. Use these different modes to think about where you want to be in the future. The third is very important. What is stopping you from getting there? So what is the barrier between where you are now and where you want to be? What's stopping you from being there? Is it just the acquisition of skills? Is it a particular mindset? It took me 1 year, right? I told you, to find a job between grad school. I graduated from Harvard. My dad told me, hey, I thought people should be lining up at your door. What's going on here? Why can't you get a job in the field that you want after graduating from a school like Harvard? And then there was a mental question for me. Am I good enough for the Singapore Public Service? Why, after 15 applications to careers.gov.sg, have I not been shortlisted for any interviews? You need to, sometimes there's a mental blockade and you need to figure out, how do I unblock myself from that? So it can be a technical thing, it can be a mental block, it can be emotional block. and you need to get through that. And so sometimes it's helpful to have other people help you uncover what that block is. And once you uncover what that block is, then it comes to the fourth question, which is, how do I overcome this barrier in order for me to get to where I'm going? What are the strategies that I can use? And what is something concrete, right? You learn about SMART goals. What is something concrete that I can do to be able to help me overcome these barriers and get me to where I want to be in that period of time? And that question can only be answered after you uncover the blockages. So once you uncover that question, put down some concrete action steps that you can take, and then you can make your journey into the next better version of yourself. So that's how you can really, really accelerate your growth and your learning in your first year, and not just in your first year, throughout your career. And it will put you quite far ahead of some of your peers who don't practice these techniques. So that's the end of this section. And maybe we can take questions. That's the end of all the presentations that I have. And so if there are any questions about this section first, maybe, and then later about the session overall, we can take those.
Hi, Rahul.
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, hi. Thanks for sharing your insights. They've been very useful all this long. And you've been mentioning growth mindset, and just now you mentioned emotional and mental block. It's very interesting because a lot of us are obviously entering the job market right now. And I think some of us, from what I've observed, we have this sense of performance anxiety, which is, I think it applies to before applying for a job, and then even after you're in a job. There are a lot of doubts that we have about ourselves. Like, let's say if we are given a task to make a presentation in front of everyone, we tend to get anxious or have a lot of questions about whether we'll be able to do it. And you were just talking about, in a way, fixing that through practical steps and through doing concrete things. I wanted to understand, yes, like the doing concrete things is very important, but is there any way, like what would you tell us in terms of shifting our mindset, or in terms of overcoming that emotional or mental block before we can even take that concrete step? Like, so this growth mindset, like what do we actually tell ourselves whenever we encounter such a situation where we doubt ourselves or we think that we are not good enough? Like, what is the mindset that we should have?
So I think it's hard to just like say. I mean, I could say, for example, think of yourself as a great presenter. That's not necessarily gonna help you so much. So what I will say is, the one thing you should keep in mind, which is true, which I've seen in my career, is both in your interviews and your work life, people really want you to succeed. Nobody out there is like, hey, Sue, I want you to fail miserably and get fired. Like, no, I mean, no, people don't want that. People want you to succeed. And people want to help you succeed. Even in interviews, in job interviews, people want you to get the right answer, and they wish they could help you, but they want to see you get the right answer. They're really happy when you get the right answer. So if you keep that in mind, this also applies to the example you cited, which is a presentation, right? It could be a high-stakes presentation. People do want you to succeed, but often you are the one who has to ask for help. Two things I can think of in terms of concrete actions, right? So one, if you see people who are really good at presentations, ask them, hey man or hey woman, like, were you always so great at presentations? And the answer I can tell you for sure is no. I was not great myself for presentation. Just to share with you, like, it requires practice myself. Like, it requires practice. I always want extra time to prepare if I can help it. I want to do a rehearsal. And of course, as time goes by, I need to spend less time preparing and less time rehearsing, but I still do that. Like, I logged on with this video an hour early so that we could go over the material. And this is, it's not, you know, so this is something that everybody does. I think it's a policy to think that somebody who is great just shows up and it's all great. Like, there's a lot of work behind the scenes that you don't see. And so then the question is, can you put yourself in a position, A, to do the work, right? Do the work, do the preparation, do the run through, and B, tap on all these people who really want you to be successful. So me and a few other people at my organization have provided that to other people. So people who don't have as much exposure presenting, we've offered, like, hey, there's 3 of us who spend a lot of time doing presentings. Come to us. You want to dry run your presentation? Come to us, try it out. and then we'll give you 15 or 30 minutes of our time. You give me a presentation, I give you feedback, I'll tell you explicitly how you can improve your presentation. Then you do it again with somebody else or in the mirror, and then you give the final presentation, and people put in that work. There are people who I've seen who are really great, and it seems like they're great because they're natural, but actually it's not true. It's because they put in a lot of work beforehand, and then that's what make it. And that's true for all people who present public speaking.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So I guess, yeah. So in a way, I from what you're saying, it sounds like the first step is to just acknowledge and accept that it's okay to be imperfect that way, and to have these things to work on. And then once you identify them, then work on them with concrete steps and by taking help from the relevant people. So I guess the first step to be okay with not being the best at something. I think it's about the mindset that you want to be good at it and you want to take the step towards it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for sure. Don't nobody gets to perfect in a day. I mean, and nobody starts off perfect, right? I mean, I think what I'm trying to communicate is I'm not asking you to take it on faith that somebody is not great. I'm telling you factually that people are bad at stuff before they become good. This is a fact. You don't have to believe me. It's true. Like, you know what I mean? Like it's a fact that people are terrible before they get good. And the only way from terrible to good is practice and getting help.
Yeah.
You know? So that's just the reality of the situation. As much as you want to believe that some people are perfect, like it's just not true.
No, I don't want to believe that. In fact, it's better if everyone knows that no one's perfect.
Yeah,
Okay,
cool.
Thank you for answering that.
Any other questions? That's a great question, Sue. Okay, Samuel, I see you've put one in the chat. Do you want to just speak it out loud? Okay, I mean, I'll read it out for you then. Hi, Rahul. Given your experiences in both the private and public sectors, what are the different nuances you've observed with respect to seeking workplace feedback? Thanks for the great sharing.
Yeah. So I think the difference is mainly, I hesitate because I don't want to generalize it to public and private sector, because there are differences in they're both big organizations with very different experiences inside. But I will say from my experience, what I experienced, at least when I was in the private sector at McKinsey, I think there's more direct feedback. What is different is giving feedback was different. So I was given feedback a lot at McKinsey without my asking for it. So that was nice because I was like, oh, like really, like somebody would just tell me, hey, this is crap because XYZ. Hey, you need to improve this, blah 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 blah. And so that was great because I didn't have to ask for a lot of feedback, because it was given to me quite often. And my manager made sure to set a check-in with me. In the beginning, it was once a week actually, and then it slowly grew less frequent to once every 2 weeks or once every month. And so he had set all of the processes up for me so that it was already defined when we would have a feedback session. So it became very normalized in the private sector, at least in my experience in the private sector. This is not always true for all private sector organizations, but certainly it was true for McKinsey. So that is really great because then you're like, you know when it is, your manager knows they have to figure out what are the examples to use for this week so they can give you good feedback, right? So they're thinking about it quite often. In the public sector, unfortunately, this wasn't really that common. So I think one thing the public sector is really great at is providing funding for training. So if you identify a course that makes sense for you to grow and learn, they're happy to fund that, and you can take the time out to do that. But there are mechanisms in place in theory for a lot of this stuff to happen. There's this thing called the individual development plan, which you're meant to fill out, which is like taking stock of like, hey, what are my goals for this year? How am I going to develop them? What projects am I going to do so that I can work on these skills? But in practice, I haven't found them to be filled that regularly, at least in some of the organizations that I came from. So what that means is then actually I, as an employee, need to do a lot of work to define, to carve out the time and space, both to think about this alone, but also to carve out time with my boss to say, hey, let's talk about what are my career goals, how are we going to structure the work that I'm going to do in order for me to achieve my goals, what are your goals for me, and what does the goals that the organization have for me, so that we can figure out a nice balance between me meeting the organization goals and me meeting my own goals. Can also think of it as the balance between exploitation and exploration, right? Exploitation is, again, not in a negative way, but just being able to exploit your skills and get stuff done that the organization needs. But you want to also build in some part of exploration, some part of growth for you to be able to explore some things. So these things are actually, you can negotiate as long as some amount of exploitation that the organization is satisfied with is complete. In general, organizations, both private and public, are quite happy for you to spend more time doing the exploration. So unfortunately, in the public sector, I've had to initiate a lot of these conversations myself more than in the private sector. That's been the big difference. And I think people are more prepared. Typically in the private sector, they know that feedback should be based on really good examples. In some of my roles in the public sector, I've been given some generic feedback. Hey, Rahul, you need to be more structured in your approach. I'm like, okay, like where was I unstructured? And then I don't get a good answer. So that's not super helpful in terms of feedback. So I think the training and the culture and the type of good feedback isn't as good as it could be in the public sector right now. Broadly speaking, of course, there are exceptions to this. My current organization is, we're designing it so that specifically feedback is super actionable and there are examples. So people are getting into that mode now, but generally speaking, it isn't always the case. Yeah. Cool. Well.
Sorry, I was on mute. I was,
Okay.
a question from a student earlier at the start of the class, actually. I wasn't sure when it was most relevant, but I think now is a good time. She said that she's been working 15 years without being recognized. And so her question is, what do I do when I'm not being recognized in my job? Two, how can I move ahead now? If I've been there 15 years, what can I do to future-proof to move ahead?
Yeah, I think recognition is tough. In some of these employee engagement surveys that I read and I've seen in my career, actually, typically in terms of you measure things like happiness, work-life balance, resource allocation, fairness, and recognition. Recognition often comes out quite low compared to the rest, and I've seen that too. And actually, what you're facing is not a unique problem. A lot of people feel less recognized. I think that there are a couple of things you should keep in mind. So the first is, what does the organization want to achieve, right? And how has your particular role played a part in that? So if you can make a case for knowing the organization's mission, knowing what it's trying to achieve, how has what you've done, and because you've had such a long experience, you should pen this down over that period of time, but also more recently, depending on the kind of recognition you want, which I'll come to in a bit, you want to pen down it in a time frame. How has what you've done been extremely useful for the organization furthering their goals and their missions? So if you can say, if the organization's goal is to improve accessibility to different communities of their product, then what are the communities that you've been able to help reach? Have you done some piece of work that helps segment the communities in a way that allows more reach to be had? And what are these figures? It's always really good to provide quantitative figures in some way, some metrics to showcase what you've been able to do. And in some things that are less tangible, maybe you might have to use things like feedback numbers from people who are users and get get numbers and benchmark them. Either if you don't have the historical figures, at least benchmark them across different organizations and have a sense of like, hey, how am I doing relative to peers in different organizations? How's our organization doing relative to other peers? So there's going to be a bit of work in terms of thinking about what is this organization achieving? What are good metrics that I use to measure that? And how has your particular part, what was your part in shaping the achievement of some of these metrics? So that's the first portion you need to think of. The second thing you need to think of is about what kind of recognition are you looking for? And that actually varies from person to person. So for example, if you're looking for a promotion or a raise, then you should make the business case for how much money you've saved or how much money you've been able to make the company grow. And then therefore that makes a case for, you know, a small promotion or a small raise. It's really peanuts compared to the value that you derive for your organization. And so you can make that case. You can make a case in terms of benchmarks. If you look at peers that have achieved similar results to you, what kind of promotions or what kind of raises have they achieved? And it can be within your organization and externally. You look at sites like Glassdoor, they provide a lot of this information. A lot of people provide information on compensation. You might want a different type of recognition. Maybe you want more leave. Maybe you want more training. Like one of the things I asked for is like, I was like, hey, you know, I had a job offer to rejoin McKinsey before taking this job, and McKinsey offered me a lot more money. And obviously there's constraints in the public service. And I told my boss, hey, I'm okay to take this pay cut, but in exchange, can you let me teach for the Center of Asia Leadership, which is a nonprofit, for like 5 or 6 or 10 days a year? That doesn't come out of my annual leave. Can we make this happen? That's a form of recognition that I want to achieve. And so if you recognize that what I'm bringing to this is value that you can't get from other people, then will you be willing to give me this type of recognition since you can't give me another type of recognition? So think about the recognition that matters to you. Some people in my organization said, oh, you know, I just want to be, there are different types, right? There are different types of roles. There's a product manager, there's an engineer, there's a product designer, there's a corporate staff. Some people are like, hey, I want my role to be acknowledged just as much as somebody else who is at the forefront because I played a role in supporting this product. Can we make sure that next time an email goes out from somebody senior, it includes my name or the people in my position? Because I want people to know that we played a role in making this happen. So you need to think about what are the types of recognition that matter to you, and then making a case for those. Some may be easier and some may be harder. But I've said some examples about how you can make some of the cases as well so that the organization knows what you've been able to do in order to recognize you. So those are some examples.
Great, that's very helpful. Any other questions?
I have a question. So my question would be, do you have a mentor, and what are your considerations approaching a particular person to be a mentor in the workplace? Like, what does being a good mentee look like for you?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So I don't have one single mentor because my path is damn weird lah. So at different times I've had to reach out to different people, right, and to think about stuff. So to answer your first question, I have different mentors for different skills actually. So for navigating the world of entrepreneurship, I told you I talked to my friend Abhishek Gupta, who I think has navigated that path really well. For the public service, there are a couple of people like I spoke to Donald, right? I spoke about Donald first. Like he's somebody I think could be a good person to think about the public service more broadly and especially from an outside perspective. But I also want an inside perspective. So I talked to people who are more senior than me about how they've navigated the public sector route. And that includes not just going up, but also going sideways. Like how do you navigate sideways in organizations to figure out what's a good way? System navigation is not trivial and not easy. It's not as easy as just being the right fit for the job. Like how is your name even going to show up and who is going to recommend you? These are things that you need to think about when you think about that. So if you think about mentorship, think about people who are good at different skills, different industries, the industries that matter to you. So like, for example, I'm interested in human capital development. I don't have a lot of exposure to it. So there are some people in public service. There's a chief people officer in GovTech who is ahead of me. I'm only the head of people and culture for open government products, which is one division under GovTech, right? So there are people who are more senior than me. There are people who are in the public service division, which thinks about HR for whole of government. those are some people that are engaged when thinking about what is the state of government, when we're thinking about human resources, and how can I advance this at a larger level than beyond just my smaller organization and my smaller ministry. How can I push forward PhDs thinking around HR for whole of government? And so these are people that are engaged there in terms of mentorship. You had a second question.
Oh, like what does, okay, no, thank you.
Oh, okay. Yeah, sorry, I remember you asked what does good mentorship look like? I think it's
Yes.
good mentorship looks like being open and being specific about their paths. So I think besides, which is nice, but the thing is everybody has a different context. Like I came from a different context, right? I came from a consulting background, unlike most people in public service. So if I ask somebody how can I leverage my consulting skills, they probably won't have a good answer. So it's about understanding what people's journey was like, taking away some of that, but also then reflecting on how it applies to your context and how it might be different in your context. And for that, I think coaching is really, really helpful. So if you have a coach is somebody who doesn't provide you any of the answers, but really asks you difficult questions to help you think about what is the best path for you at your point in time for your context. And I think that can be really helpful and powerful in determining a path that's more suitable for you, whereas a mentor will share with you a possible pathway, the one that they took and that will help for you. So that there's a difference there, and I think it's useful to engage both of them.
Thank you.
Rahul, just to chime in there, the third part of the question, what does a good mentee look like? Could you address that? So for all the students here who are going to pick up a mentor, how can they be a good mentee?
Actually, what I would recommend, I would highly recommend if you wanna get a mentor, a bit sneaky, honestly, but like don't say, "Can you be my mentor?" Like don't do it because not like really no, because it's hard to commit, right? Because if you say my mentor, it's a very ill-defined noun, right? I mean, it's like, what does that mean? If you ask me, your mentor means what? I must talk to you every day, or every week, or every month. Well, I mean, like, what are you asking from me? And so people might be hesitant to commit to that. That's why I'm saying don't ask somebody to be your mentor, because like don't do it. Like form that relationship organically. The relationship that I've had with people who are mentors are people who approached me and said, "Hey, Rahul, and to your point, just what makes a good mentee? I'd like to have a conversation with you that is 45 minutes long, and I would like to cover these 3 things." Right? This is a bit of background about me. This is where I am about in my journey, like 2 or 3 lines. Here's background. If you want to read more, here's my LinkedIn profile. Here's what I really want to learn for you, and this is you are relevant to talk to me because I also making a transition from private to public sector, or I am really interested in human capital and I have just no idea where to get started. How the hell did you transition from engineering to human capital? And what was that journey like? Here are the 3 questions I want to spend time thinking about. If you show that A, you put in effort to summarize and condense who you are, B, like why this makes sense, why me in particular makes sense as a mentor for you, and 3, that you just put in the work to summarize your own thinking around, like, not that I have to in the call say, where are you now, where you want to go, then you start thinking, waste of my time, waste of your time. That's a terrible idea. So if you show me you've done these thinking up front, then I might be willing to give a 30 or 45-minute call with you. It's possible. And that has happened already several times. For some people, this is enough. They just want a one-time direction to say, hey, this is my pathway, this is enough for me, I'll go on my way, which is fine. For some people, they're like, hey, at the end of the call, this is really helpful for me. What I found is there are different possible career options for me. I want to think about which is more suitable for me. And at the end of my thinking, I'd like to come back to you on another call to explore what are the specific action steps that I can take once I've decided what is the path I want to pursue. Are you willing to take a second call with me for 1 hour in 1 month's time? And I will come back to you before that as a mentee to tell you what path I'm taking and why. So if you show me that you're willing to do the work and you make the best use of my time, actually, I'm willing to commit some amount of time. I'm a mentor for advisory, actually. Advisory is an awesome program. I don't know if you guys have signed up for it, and I think it might be closed for this wave, but they got over 1,000 applicants for mentees, and they have a fantastic mentee and mentor handbook to tell you what it takes to be a good mentee. And part of it is filling this worksheet with like 10 questions to tell a mentor more about you. And each session of 3 sessions is preceded by a worksheet that a mentee is expected to fill in and provide information. And it's stuff like this that I've said. And that's really helpful because then I can help steer some of the conversation and share more about what is going to be relevant for that particular person. So that's how you be a good mentee.
Okay, great, wonderful, wonderful. There are 2 more questions. I'm just conscious of time. I think we take these last 2 questions, Rahul, and then call it a day.
Perfect.
Okay, Helen and Diana. All right, Diana, let's go with yours first. How can we deal with a situation when we have colleagues who view us as threats and purposely hide details of the projects that they have been working on, although everyone is supposed to be the same team? That's part 1. Part 2 is, okay, I have a friend whose direct manager falsely claims my friend's work as her effort to the director. And being the most junior, my friend can't afford to set the record straight because it'll offend the relationship with her manager. So there's 2 questions in that.
Yeah, 2 questions, but similar themes, I think. So those are tough situations, and they're real situations, right? I mean, I've been through different versions of this on 2. But to give you more direct answers, I think you can't avoid conflict. There's going to be some element of conflict involved, and the question is, how do you raise it in a way that is productive conflict rather than conflict that there's definitely going to be some amount of risk. That's just the reality of the situation, and you have to how can you minimize the risk but also take action? So to both the situations, what you ought to do is you need to have documentation to back up what you claim. Like just really. So if for example your colleague has the project, you need to document stuff. You need to say, hey, I email people, IM people if that's documented in your workplace, and then you have to show that there's no response. Or in the longer term, you'll obviously show a hiding response, right? If you can ask a targeted question and somebody is evasive answer, then it's quite clear that they are hiding the stuff. So first thing you need to document this, because if push comes to shove, you will be asked for evidence, and whoever can show documentation is solid. And this, even for your second question, I would presume your friend has documentation, right? Because if they send the deck or whatever the presentation is and the work to the director, then or not to the boss, to the direct manager, then you would have this documentation. There's posts on Reddit and stuff about this too. So first, get the documentation. Second, how do you have to one approach is certainly to go to the next level boss, for sure. So in when it's the same team, give feedback about that colleague to the boss. You need to be able to trust the boss and maybe openly communicate to the boss that it doesn't come from you. And some bosses are really good at providing feedback or figuring out the dynamic without blaming you. So for example, the manager, your manager could basically ask your colleague, hey, what's been going on? What's the sharing mechanism? How has sharing been going? More broadly, right? You could have a team discussion. Do you all feel like you have know enough about each other's work? And if not, then how can we change this? Could be a team level discussion, could be a one-on-one discussion. So I hope you can trust, and if not, you make it explicit to your manager that this is a conversation that they need to have and this is what's happening. And so documentation would be helpful there. Actually, I think for your friend's work, the one that's been kaput by the manager, right? Actually, I think you have to go straight to the director. Again, that's the same solution, but you do it in a way that the director is able to ask questions and then document. You have to send the documentation up, and hopefully the director can do it in a way that basically catches the manager out and it not be attributed to you. I know it's hard, but I think that's the most effective way to do it. Another possible way is to engineer, and this is hard, but to engineer a situation where if you've done the work, you should be able to actually show that you know more about the work than the manager, right? I mean, your friend. and knows more about the work than the manager. And so if there's a situation where there's a group meeting or a presentation and your friend actually ends up answering the questions better than the manager, then I think that's going to look a bit suspicious for the manager who has supposedly done the work. So if that such a situation can be engineered, then that may be another avenue without going straight to the director, but it's a bit indirect and it's a bit hard to do. Yeah, I think the one thing you want to think about is being explicit to the manager or the director, not to name you in the thing and find a way. That, I mean, people who are managers should have encountered. You're not the first person to face this, and neither is your friend. So I would hope that managers and directors have the sufficient expertise to be able to elicit some of this stuff without saboing getting the people, and just have some trust. And if not, you want to make it explicit to say, don't use my name.
Okay, that's a very difficult situation, and thanks for your comprehensive answer, Rahul. Diana, I just have one thought to add, right? So just make sure your friend clarifies first. It's common for directors to or managers to say, this is what my team has done. And then that's different from saying that, okay, this is exactly the work I did, it's all my effort. As a team leader, it is common for them to say, okay, as a whole, we've achieved this. So just clarify with your friend whether your friend is really being shortchanged for credit, or whether it's the director or the manager putting forward that, okay, as a whole, this is what I oversaw my team to do. Because that manager definitely did oversee your friend in some way. So it's a gray area, so just be careful as well. Last one, Helen. You can wrap us off with your question, Helen. I invite you to turn on your mic and go for it.
So hello, Rahul. Thanks for entertaining my last question. So my question is, do you think fresh graduates should be picky with their first job? Or rather, can they afford to be picky with their first job, especially during COVID-19? Like, in the sense that, can we pick a job that will equip us with future-proof skills, or should we just go with any job that comes our way since we are like inexperienced?
So I think it's a tough question, and I think everybody has their own threshold, right, of how much, because part of this depends on how long you're willing to wait for the perfect job as well, and how much you can, and that's sometimes a luxury that some people can afford and some people cannot. So it really depends on your own situation. But what I would encourage you to do is to first identify what kind of job you want to do, and what you should do then is be creative about how you get yourself there. So what I mean by this is, there are some companies that are not hiring full-time roles anymore, but maybe they are open to contract jobs. Maybe they are open to internships. Maybe they are open to volunteering. There are many different arrangements that can be made for you to do some work in the area and in the organization or in the industry that you might be interested in. So be creative, because one of the advantages, you think about the disadvantages quite often, but you should think about one of the advantages of being a fresh grad is that you don't have overhead. Like, I have a wife and a mortgage to pay. I can't afford to, go and volunteer my time 24/7. But you may be able to for a longer period of time, certainly, than me, if I want to keep paying my mortgage. So think about, that's a big advantage that you have as a fresh grad, that you have more flexibility to play around with the type of engagement that you have with organizations. So use that flexibility creatively so that you can find ways. It might be, part-time somewhere and volunteering somewhere else. It might be contract work here, but also on the side, learning and growing. So use your time flexibility and creatively, because you don't have some of the baggage that some of us older people have. You don't have a certain lifestyle that you're acclimatized to, a certain salary that you have to earn to meet certain basic demands, hopefully. So use that creatively to your advantage to structure something that you are at least partially satisfied with. Yeah.
Hey. That's a wrap, everybody. Well, everyone, thank you so much for being here. Before you go, I would really require your help. Rahul, if you can unshare your screen, I will share mine. If you could all just help get online and provide us the feedback at this link. Let me put it up. Okay, so you can either scan the QR code, or I'm going to just paste the link into the chat. And if you can go online and simply respond to the feedback, that'll be really helpful, because this is the first of its kind in the series. We're really happy to have Rahul here. We would love to know more about how we can make this session better for you in the future. So any feedback you have for us will be really, really helpful. And yeah, so take a minute to do that. And at the same time, if you are, you still got some questions, and I think Rahul, we might be here for another 5-7 minutes if you have time. I think if you want to ask a question, you can drop it in on the chat privately, and we'll let everyone else go, and we can take your question on the side. But in the meantime, yeah, please fill up the feedback. Thank you.
Thanks everyone for attending and participating.
Okay, well, everyone, as you fill in the feedback, I suppose you all have opened up that link on your browser, on your phone. I just want to say thank you very, very much. Next Tuesday, same time, 12 p.m., we have another session, a female-only session. It's about leading in, standing out, speaking up, how to be a girl boss. My friend and someone I admire and respect a lot, Miss Amrita Toor, now at Klook, formerly from Goldman Sachs, will be coming in to do a great sharing about how females can create a more healthy and more effective time for themselves in the workplace. She'll be sharing her experiences and what she did to get a seat at the table. Okay, so, well, thank you very much, everyone. Rahul, thank you so much. If there's anything you want to say before we close off.
Good luck. Thank you all. Have a good day.
Okay, thanks, guys. I'm going to be closing this off. But if anyone wants to ask any last questions, you can just, maybe we'll stay in for the next 5, but you guys can leave in the meantime. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
See you, Sue. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Hi, I wanted to ask another question. This
who's
is
this?
Violet.
Oh, Violet. Hi, Violet. Yeah.
Hi. Okay, maybe I should just on the video. Okay, sorry. I wanted to ask, what is, let's say if, because I'll be working in a public sector job soon. So let's say if my boss doesn't bring up certain conversations about what their expectation for me is, in terms of presentation or mentoring and all that, what is the best way to talk about it?
You can bring it up. I mean, you can have a session. Actually, I think a nice way to do it in your intro conversation, I'm sure you'll have a conversation when you start work about work preferences, norms, and maybe some expectations, is to share your own hopes or your expectations about feedback. I think if you share upfront that, hey, I'm somebody who really is interested to receive feedback sooner rather than later. My old boss had a really great habit of you just come by my desk every so often. It's hey, you did this piece of work. It just took 30 seconds. This is my feedback on it. I would have done it this way if I was you. And then it's something for me to think about. So that was really cool. So if you express to your boss what your preferences are for receiving feedback, then you can see whether they have the same preferences, or if not, one of you can adjust your preferences and then see it. I would say the minimum is once. I think in public service it's common to have it once in 3 months or once in 6 months, but maybe you can ask your boss for a 30-minute session at the end of the month to first check in and then see how that goes, and then based on that you adjust. You don't have to commit to anything, but you can ask for feedback as you go. And if you talk about the specific skills you want feedback on, that'll be more helpful for your boss, because then they can give you more specific feedback.
Okay, thank you.
Cool. Welcome.
I'll go first. Bye.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much, Rahul. I think that was a really good session. Lots of questions, lots of engagement from the participants.
All
Wait,
right.
I think there was one question we missed. Janani, are you still there?
Yes, I'm here. Hi
Oh, hey.
again.
Yeah, go
I'll
for it.
switch on my video as well. I'm just curious because similar to Violet, I'll actually be joining a public sector job. It's my first job, but it's also a management program, so it's rotation based. And I'm just curious if there is any additional advice or feedback on how I can perform well, because I think one of my concern is that I'm going to be in each division for 3 to 4 months. So,
Yeah.
for example, if I would like to get onto projects where I can improve certain skills, for example, how do I kind of create that opportunity for myself? I think given that I have like the contact I would have with my team, for example, it's kind of like short in that sense as compared to like a full year in a certain department. So how do I kind of create that opportunity for myself? And also I think leave a lasting impression
Yeah.
that
So
is positive.
yeah, no, so I think the reality is it's gonna be tough. The reality is you're probably gonna be a net drain on resources rather than an add. I mean, I just
I
think that
acknowledge that.
yeah, that's just the reality of the situation. Like my shortest stint I think was a 6 month stint at SkillsFuture, and even that. So what I will say is you should try and as far as possible scope the the project or your time there before you join. And that's what helped me a lot. So it's like scoping, being very specific about what are the outcomes that I'm going to achieve and what I'm going to do. So as soon as I join, I'm like, okay, I know like phase 1 month, I'm going to do this, phase 2, I'm going to do this, phase 3, I'm going to do this. So I need to be done with my phase and stuff. And then having checkpoints, like milestone checkpoints, at least like probably one, for you, it's probably going to be just one midway through, make sure like, hey, I'm this is where I'm at, like anything needs to change drastically or not. And then at the end you have a presentation, and that to that part of the organization, that division, the only meaningful thing you will leave them with is some presentation at the end of for your work lah. And so that you should do that for all three of your three or whatever, how many ever rotations you have. The additional thing I think that you can add value not to a specific division but to the organization as a whole is now that you've got the somewhat unique perspective of going through different divisions, what are some things that maybe there are some synergies that are missed out, right? Of like how these departments can work together or should work together, but they didn't. Or where can the organization maybe take some of the best practices that you saw that are applied in one part or one division, but not applied in others? And these things may be more apparent to you because you have enough time, 3 or 4 months, but not so much time that you get stuck into this is the norm. So this is where you can add value to the larger organization by saying, actually, I've thought about this after my 3 or 4 experiences. These are some things that some suggestions for what the organization can do differently. I think that would be very valuable for the organization.
Thank you. I had another question also on from here, for example, if I would like to go into human development. And I think the last conversation I had with Jasbir as well, I was actually considering consultancies with people and organizations, for example, like perhaps boutique firms and stuff like that. So how then would you foresee making that transition?
So how long, how do I foresee making a transition? I mean, you work in the public sector, so you get enough exposure. Ideally, you should put your hand up as much as possible for human development related things. I don't think it's that hard. I managed to do it in all my roles before this. So this is things like, for example, hey, I'm happy to facilitate a conversation around our employee engagement survey or whatever equivalent there is of that with staff and get a sense of what the real pulse is on the ground. Can be like, oh, I want to design something that allows people to check in more and get a pulse of like what the team needs and where the team is going. I did that too. So if you do that stuff, then that basically enhances your own credibility and your own track record in doing that stuff, and that makes you a better candidate when you do any human development role in the future. And that's how I managed my transition, by doing this work even before it was ever an official role of mine. And then the second part is actually the transition itself. Is I think you need to identify what type of role you really want, right? Because if you want to actually do the work, consulting is not the best idea because you're just primarily giving advice. But if you want like really good intellectual stimulation and you want to be exposed to really different challenges over every few months, and you like the rotation experience that you have in the public service, then consulting might be quite a good fit for you. So if you identify the type of role that you want, whether it's advisor or hands-on, and at what level you want to be hands-on, then that will help identify the next course of action. And then you need to network your way into talking to somebody who's at the organization to get some kind of referral or recommendation. If you just apply straight out, the odds are really, really low that you'll get shortlisted for any job, really. Yeah.
Got it. Thank you.
Cool. Welcome.
Well, John, congratulations. Good to hear that you secured a job since the last time we spoke.
Yes, thanks. I'll actually be returning to where I interned. So they did kind of offer, I think I might sort of say it like Enterprise Singapore. So
Cool.
I'll be going back there. Yeah. So quite interesting because I'll also have an overseas rotation. So I thought like that's why I decided to return. Yeah.
Congratulations.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, well,
Right.
looks like we can call it a day. I don't think there's any other questions. What
Yes.
I'll do is that I will quickly just maybe remove everybody, and then you and I can just have a quick debrief, Rahul. How about that?
Sounds good.
All right. Okay, let me just do that. Oh, looks like, oh, okay. I guess you guys were actually listening and now people are leaving. Well, thanks everyone. Maybe we'll catch you at the next webinar, okay? Take care, guys. Bye-bye. Okay. How did you find the session, Rahul?
Good. The bit of messiness around the breakout rooms, but and I think I don't know. So I went into a bunch of breakout rooms. Sorry to zoom in first before I zoom out, and then like a bunch of them were just like not there.
Yeah, because it takes time. So what I've learned as I was overseeing all of this is that what we needed to do differently was tell everybody, okay, when I hit go to breakout room, you'll get a message that says join, and you have to join it physically. You have to like actively join it. Otherwise, if you don't respond, it's just this abyss, and then you get sent back to the main room. So that happens. That's me learning as well on the fly because I don't. I did it once in a class, and it was a graded class. They had to participate, so I had no problems. Everyone was very law-abiding. I haven't done it. I mean, doing it in a webinar is a bit different, I guess, in this sense. So yeah, that was one thing. And then when people join and then they see nobody else joined, they didn't realize that I gotta wait for them to come in. They get confused and then they leave.
Oh.
So it's a merry-go-round. So I think you ended up in the one where I found you. I think they had kind of like settled into it already.
Yeah.
That was. And then I was also trying to find you. I was like, Rahul keeps moving groups. I'm trying to stop him so I can get the damn questions. Finally, I caught you. I literally am chasing your tail. And I'm like, oh, he's left. Because I was like, oh shit, the slide stopped sharing when he left. But I thought the co-host, you wouldn't get put into a group. So I need to figure out how to stop people getting thrown into groups when they don't need to be in a group. So
Yeah, because
anyway.
you're right. Because all the co-hosts got thrown into groups actually. Even Dave or so.
Dave and, yeah. So oh well. We live and learn. We live and learn. But I think.
But other than that, zooming out, I thought reasonably good engagement, good turnout, good engagement. Yeah. How do you find it?
Yeah, I think there were a lot of questions at the start. So somehow I think there's often lags lah. So we might say put it on the chat, and then there was nothing, and then 1 or 2, and then the moment you started talking, like 15 questions came in. So it's probably a lag with the Wi-Fi or whatever, and so that's where most of my questions to you in your first Q&A came from. Although they didn't ask it at the end, they asked it at the very start. So students had issues they wanted to address. I thought it was pretty good. And then those that spoke up on their own accord, quite normal. There is always 10% that will speak up, unfortunately, in NUS. If this was SMU, maybe you get 30, 40, 50%. If this was business school or law school, you get maybe that amount as well. But if this, the large demographic is your FASS, your FOS. FOS students very quiet. Faculty of Science, and then your engineering also a bit half-half. But yeah, I think on the whole, pretty good engagement just based on the questions we were getting. Students had stuff that you were addressing. I thought the exercise on futures thinking themselves and giving them the 4 steps, 4 questions was very interesting. Even the mechanics might have gotten in the way. I think that's very eye-opening. I liked the last 3 points on feedback, self-improvement, and reflection as well. I think that's very tangible for them. And you can see the questions, a lot of it were related to that as well. So very good. Thank you so much.
Cool. I didn't ask you this before the session, but the feedback form that they all fill in, right? What is in that form actually?
So it's just let me pull it up.
Oh, I recommend. I find it useful. Okay,
yeah, stuff like that, right? So would you recommend this to a friend? What else? Let me see the questions. Yeah, so what did I put in there? Would you recommend it to a friend? Some demographic detail about when they graduate and whether they've attended an engagement by my department before. That will tell me whether stuff like this is more interesting for them, therefore they engage for the first time. So I'll recommend this to a friend. I found the contents useful for my career. The instructor or the speaker was effective. I'm motivated to apply what I learned and overall score. And then 2 things or 1 thing you have learned and how can the session be improved. So that's basically the gist of it. I will.
I'm interested in the results.
Yeah, so I was just going to say that. So you're okay with me sharing the slides? Then what I'll do is I'm going to email all the participants after this class. I've got a call starting in 3 minutes, but after that I'll email the participants the slides, and then for those who didn't get to do the feedback, I'll email that included as well. And I think you mentioned a few things like Pomodoro. I'll include. I made a video about Pomodoro technique as well, so I'll drop that in so that they have a sense of what that is and how they can apply it.
You can include the link to the Center for Strategic Futures, the driving forces cards.
Good one. Yeah, good one. Let me write that down. So yeah, I'll put it all in. So it just said CSF, right? That's all. CSF.sg, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll put it all in. Do you want me to copy you so that they have your email address, or you prefer not?
Prefer not.
Okay, you get spammed. All right.
Yeah.
Cool. Anything else? Anything
No.
we can do for you in return? Any like, I don't know, survey that you want us to fill up or something for the work that you're doing? I mean, if this was a physical session, we would have a token and all that fancy stuff, a lunch after, but we can't do that right now. How can I say thank you?
I think I'm good for now. I'll let you know. I'll keep the favor and let you know when I want to use it.
Okay, cool. All right, man.
Awesome. Cool.
Take care, brother.
Thanks, man.
See you. Let me know if I can help with Cinder.
Yeah, I'll let you know. And then send me the results of the feedback form when they're ready.
Yeah, what happened with your friend? Your friend attended my class, right? Forget her name.
Yeah. So she's organizing the webinar. We're doing one next week with some dude called Gavin Sia. I don't know how good he's going to be. I will attend some of it. But yeah, so we're going to see. His name is Gavin Sia. He's apparently done a bunch of these things for corporates and stuff.
And he's doing it pro bono.
Yeah.
Good.
So I want to gauge what the interest level is based on signups and based on the take-up rate. And then if you want to do a second session, I'll let you know.
Sure. Sounds good, bro. Oh, he's from Aventis, is it?
I think so. I don't even know if he was on LinkedIn when I looked for him.
All right, no worries. Anyway, take care, my friend. It was great that we got to do this. And yeah, if there's anything I can help with in the future, let me know.
Cool. Sounds good, man.
Oh, stay safe. Bye.
You too. Ciao.